Hello all, a great afternoon. Sorry for to have kept you waiting. So there was a small technical glitch over here. So now it is actually resolved. So let us begin our session. So all of you, welcome to our Prelims Masterclass 2025. This is Sureka Bhaskar and I'm dealing with environment and ecology for the upcoming prelims examination, that is 2025. Okay. So prelims is round the corner and it is important that we make quick as well as smart revision of our current affairs, okay, so that you stay relevant in the competition, and it's also going to give you an edge over other aspirants, and this is such a masterclass that's going to help you ace this examination with confidence as well as clarity. Okay, so let's quickly get into the session because we are already late. So let me quickly take you through our daily ritual. That is, without this slide we don't take off, right? So I will tell you, if you are the first timer watching this particular video, we are running a 10 what to say a 10-day class. Okay, per session is of 2 hours and this will cover the entire current affair topics from January 2024 to March 2025. Okay, so this will be a one-stop destination for you guys in case you've missed the current affairs or missed following the current affairs for the past 1 year. Okay, so in this series I have actually categorized the current affair topics into these particular themes. Okay, the first of which is ecosystems. So we started with the ecosystems and we started with the forest ecosystems and different initiatives that are have been launched by the global efforts as well as the national efforts in order to conserve the forest. And also we looked at the ocean ecosystem, where we discussed about the high seas treaty, the blue flag certification and so on. And we moved on to discuss the other kinds of ecosystem, where we discussed about the mangrove ecosystem, the conservation of wetland ecosystem under the Ramsar Convention. We also discussed about the coral reefs, different types of reefs, artificial reefs, the deep sea corals, etc., and how they are different from that of the shallow corals. And we also discussed about the other ecosystem like the mountain ecosystem and so on. Okay, so we discussed all these topics under the ecosystem. Then we moved on to discuss about the environmental organization and bodies, where we discussed again about the global efforts like the World Wildlife Fund for Nature as well as the Global Environmental Facility, which actually gives or it acts as an operating or the funding mechanism for other conventions which are related to that of the environment conservation, like the UNFCCC, the Minamata Convention, the Stockholm Convention to Persistent Organic Pollutants, etc. Moving forward, we discussed about the national organizations like the IMD, that is Indian Meteorological Department, which has successfully completed 150 years since inception. And we also saw one of its recent initiative with respect to that of the climate, that is framework on climate services or activities. Okay, so we looked at this, and then we also looked into the concept of NGT, the composition and what is the authority of the National Green Tribunal, the type of rulings or the judgments that the NGT can actually give, its overriding powers, all that we discussed here, and also the annual report that is given by the Central Groundwater Board, its authority, composition, members, etc. So all this we had actually discussed under environmental organization and bodies. Moving forward, we move to the third important topic, that is climate change. We started with the mitigation and the adaptation efforts of climate change, where we discussed about different technological interventions such as the carbon capture as well as utilization and storage technique, that is the CCUS. We also looked at various interventions that have been brought by the different governments, for example, the carbon border adjustment mechanism by the European Union. So all these things we discussed over here. So CBAM was discussed here, and also we've discussed about the CCUS, and we looked at the concept of carbon market mechanism, where the carbon credits are actually brought and sold in order to curb the menace of pollution. Okay, so apart from this, just a minute, let me just open and see our viewers also for today. Yes, okay. So apart from this, what did we do? We actually moved into the recent COP29, okay, Conference of Parties of the UNFCCC, that is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and the COP16 of UNCCD that we actually discussed, that is the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. And also we saw, what is it? The Green Climate Fund, as well as we saw the Green Credit Program. Okay, So after discussing all this, we actually jumped on to what are all the measures that India has actually taken in order to curb the climate change, which included the greenwashing rules that has, or the greenwashing guidelines that was come up by the CCPA, that is the Central Consumer Protection Authority, as well as Ecomark rules of 2024, and also we saw the coastal regulation zones, etc. Okay, see, we actually saw the relaxation of the provisions of the CRZ notification of 2019 for infrastructure development. Okay, then we moved on to biodiversity, the fourth important topic. We discussed about tiger reserves, we discussed about the biosphere reserves, international designation by UNESCO. Then we moved forward to discuss about the eco-sensitive areas and how these act as a buffer to all the protected areas like the national parks, the biosphere reserves, the wildlife sanctuaries, etc. Also, we discussed about the meetings, okay? That is, we discussed about COP16 to UN CBD. Okay, so CBD is nothing but Conservation of Biological Convention on Biological Diversity for conserving the biodiversity. Also, we saw the updated national targets or national action plans for biodiversity that has been released by India in lines with the next topic was Kunming Protocol. So, the updated list was as per the Kunming Montreal Protocol that actually came in COP 2015 in Kunming, that was in 2022. Okay, so apart from this, we looked at various other conservation efforts, like we saw the International Big Cat Alliance, that's a global alliance that was initiated by India in 2023 in order to commemorate the 50th year of Project Tiger, which actually came up in the year 1973. Then moving forward, we looked at the tiger conservation coalition, and then we looked at the convention on international trade of endangered species of flora and fauna, that is CITES. And then we moved on to discuss about the integrated development of wildlife habitat, where we actually saw this was a centrally sponsored scheme by the government of India 2008, and that actually it encompassed or encapsulates different other conservation efforts like the Project Tiger, the Project Elephant, the Project Dolphin, and so on. Okay, so with this we actually ended our topic on biodiversity. Then we moved to pollution. I told you there are different types of pollution. One was air pollution, next was actually the water pollution, and then the soil pollution. And under air pollution, we saw three different topics. One is Air of Anthropocene Initiative, which is actually an amalgamation of science plus art in order to depict what is the quantum of pollution that the world is actually facing. And then we moved on to the National Clean Air Program. We discussed about how the cities are categorized over here and how they actually have to follow the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. Okay, so we also looked at NAAQS standards, and what are they, what is the regulating agency, that is a Central Pollution Control Board. All that we actually discussed over here. Now moving forward, we saw another concept of ground level ozone. Okay, that is also called as the tropospheric ozone, and how potent is it as a greenhouse gas. Okay, so we discussed all these topics. Okay, so huge number of topics. So since it's the 7th class, right, so we have almost discussed around 70 topics, and I have taken you through all the 70 topics over here. Okay, so this is how your revision notes also should be there. Okay, so you have to be with the topics on your fingertips so that it is easier for you to revise as the exam gets closer. Okay, now moving forward, let us actually see what are the topics that we discussed yesterday. So we actually started with, what is this? This is the water. Is it visible? No, it's not visible. Okay, so let me change the pen. Okay, so we actually started with the Water Amendment Bill of 2024. This was actually passed by the Parliament, replacing the Water Act of 1974. We saw what are all the powers that it actually gives the central government over the State Pollution Control Board in establishing the treatment plants that will be releasing their effluents into the water. So after this, we discussed this particular concept of UN Water Convention, which was very, very important. So when was it open for signing? Okay, it was actually open by 2016 because to all the UN countries. Okay, earlier it was restricted only to the European Union because it's that European the European region, because it is actually under the aegis of what? The United Nations Economic Commission to the Europe. Okay, so this is actually the agency. Next, we moved on to see how are the GHGs like the carbon dioxide as well as methane are considered to be pollutants or the marine pollutants under United Nations Convention on Laws of Seas, that is the UNCLOS. So please, if you're watching this for the first time, this series is extremely important for your examination because every detail has been discussed, okay, in these videos. Then moving forward, we actually started with the range or the the status of arsenic contamination in water. So we also discussed about what is arsenic and what is the level of contamination it can actually cause by changing the root mass, and then the productivity or the fertility of the soil, and of the yield which is of the crops, etc. Okay, so we looked at this, and then the last topic that we were actually discussing was the Jal Sanchay Initiative. Okay, so next was the Jal Sanchay Initiative or Jal Sanchay Jan Bhagidari Initiative. Okay, so according to this initiative, it actually focused on conservation of water through the rainwater harvesting technologies or establishment of these structures, where they actually considered that saving water as a resource is very important, but at the same time it has to be a social commitment, and then they actually gave this godly tone to the conservation of water, that the rivers have to be conserved as if, or they have to be respected as goddesses. So this is what it said. So it actually came from the successful Jal Sanchay program from Gujarat. Okay, so this is what we saw. Then we moved on to the concept of soil pollution. Okay, so this is how the soil gets polluted. This is picture of the landfill, how infiltration and all actually causes the percolation of the toxic substances underneath, contamination of groundwater, and so on. Okay, so we discussed two concepts over here. So one concept was actually what? The salt affected soils, the salt affected soils over here, and then we looked at the concept of soil acidification. Okay, so soil acidification was the next topic we dealt with. Then we moved on to the other types of pollution. So what is the other type of pollution? We started with light pollution yesterday. Okay, we started with light pollution, and also we moved on to the global nitrous oxide budget of 2024. So here we actually would have seen that nitrous oxide is around 300 times more potent, okay, on an average of 100 years when compared to that of carbon dioxide. So here we've actually till here we had completed. Okay, so when we came to the next topic, that is methane pollution, we were not able to complete fully. So we will take up from today's topic, that is we will take up from this topic today. Okay, so we will start with methane pollution. So if you can actually see this particular image over here, so we are going to start with what? This nitrogen. Sorry, over here you have. Okay, this is not visible, right? We will write in red color. Is it visible? Can anyone tell me if it is visible for you guys? Yeah. Okay, thank you. So here we actually have the methane pollution. So today we will be discussing about methane pollution. So what is methane and what are the sources of methane? What is the contribution of anthropogenic factors in driving or contributing significantly to this methane pollution? And we will also look at what are all the initiatives that have been actually taken across the globe as well as by India in order to curb this menace of methane pollution. And what are the drivers means? We'll talk about the natural as well as the human induced factors, okay, like agriculture as well as livestock rearing, etc. Next, we will move towards and discuss about nitrogen pollution. So nitrogen pollution not only disturbs the soil but also air and water are affected by that, because excessive presence of nitrogen actually causes a syndrome that is called as methemoglobinemia in adults as well as in children, that is what is called as the blue baby syndrome. So we will discuss about the ill impacts of the nitrogen pollution also. And then okay, just 1 minute. So this is the nitrogen pollution. Okay, fine. So we actually had started about, sorry, I was just this one in between. Okay, fine. We will be dealing with the nitrogen pollution and what is going to be the impact that it is actually going to have on the adults as well as the infants is what we will see over here. And moving forward, we will look into another kind of pollution. This is called as the mercury pollution. Okay. So mercury pollution. So let us see what is mercury and what are the sources that actually release mercury into the atmosphere, or what are all the impacts it's actually going to have on the ecosystem is what we will discuss over here. Then the next topic that we will be discussing, that will be the last topic on pollution. What are the last topic? What is the last topic? This is pollution of the persistent organic pollutants. Okay, persistent organic pollutants that are also called as the POPs. Okay, and however there has actually been a study that says that the quantum or the pollution that is actually caused by the persistent organic pollutants have decreased significantly. However, there has been an increased impact that has been caused by PFAS. What is PFAS? PFAS actually stands for your perfluoro, or it is your polyfluoroalkyl substances. Okay. So what is this? And with respect to POPs, we actually have what convention? The Stockholm Declaration. Whether India has ratified it or not is what we have to know. Very, very important. And with respect to mercury also, we have the Minamata Convention. Whether India has actually ratified it or not is what is very, very important. Okay. Now, we will move forward and move to our next topic. After completing pollution, we will be discussing about waste management. So let me occupy the darker part of the board. Okay. So under waste management, there are three different topics. Okay. So what are the three different topics? One is actually your plastic waste management. So plastic waste management is the first topic. The second topic is the e-waste management. And the third topic is going to be the global framework on chemicals. Global framework on chemicals. Okay, so here we actually end our intro of what we are going to discuss in this particular lecture. So now let's quickly start without any further delay. So the other types of pollution, that is where we discussed about light pollution. Now we will actually move on to the next one, that is the methane pollution under other kinds of pollution. Okay. So the International Energy Agency recently actually came up with the study with respect to that of the methane emissions in the atmosphere. Okay. So that was actually called as the Global Methane Tracker of 2024. So the International Energy Agency's Global Methane Tracker 2024, this has noted that in 2023, the emissions of methane that has actually come from the fossil fuels have reached around 120 million tons. Okay, so this has actually breached the record level. So this has been the observation that has been made by the Global Methane Tracker. Again, you need to know Global Methane Tracker has been released by who? The International Energy Agency. Very, very important. Now, let us move on quickly to discuss about methane. So what do you know about methane? It is a colorless, it is an odorless and highly flammable gas. Very, very important. If you see nitrous oxide, yesterday we discussed about the global nitrous oxide budget, right? So this is nothing but, it is also called as the laughing gas, but this is non-inflammable. Okay, very, very important. These properties are sometimes part of your general science and it is asked in your examination. So you need to know all these small things, like what is the concentration of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, which is the strongest pollutant, and nitrous oxide is how much more times potent when compared to that of carbon dioxide. All that you need to know. So this is methane and it is lighter than air. If you see the contribution of methane to global warming, it is the second largest contributor to global warming after carbon dioxide. If you see the gases or the greenhouse gases and how much do they actually contribute to the total global emissions, you will see the first is carbon dioxide. Okay, so first is carbon dioxide. So this is what they are telling here also, no, the global warming after carbon dioxide. So second is methane, and the third is nitrous oxide. Okay, so this is actually the what to say, the ranking of the contribution of these gases to global warming. If you see, of the total emissions, around 76% of the emissions actually come from carbon dioxide, and from methane around only 16% of the emissions come, and this is around only 6 to 10% of the emissions come. But why do they actually say that this is actually what to say, more potent? Okay, so in terms of trapping the heat, methane as well as nitrous oxide are so many times more potent when compared to carbon dioxide. So if you see on an average of 100 years, okay, what is the amount of pollution or the global warming that carbon dioxide can cause? If carbon dioxide can cause 1 parts of pollution, then what happens? This methane can actually cause around 35 times of the what to say, whatever carbon dioxide can cause, and similarly around 300 times more what nitrous oxide can cause. So that is why they are saying these are even more or very very powerful or dangerous greenhouse gases. Okay, so moving on, this particularly contributes to around 30% of the global heating since the industrial revolution. I also told you, somewhere around 16 to 30%. Since global revolution, if you actually, since the industrial revolution, if you see, it has contributed to almost how much? 30% of the pollution. And what is the global warming potential? It has so many more times. Okay, see, certain records actually say it is 80 times more potential. Some actually say it is 20 to 30 times more potential. However, it has more potential. It is a more potential greenhouse gas when compared to carbon dioxide. Don't confuse with the numbers. Okay, UPSC does not play with numbers. Okay, next, despite its higher global warming potential, methane has a shorter atmospheric lifetime. Okay, so that is the quantum or the period in which the, or the length of period in which this particular greenhouse gas or the methane can live in the atmosphere is very very less compared to carbon dioxide. Okay, and also it results or sometimes results in what, or contributes to the formation of ground level ozone, that we already saw, right? Ozone is what? O3. So we know ozone is actually present in what layer of the atmosphere? It is present in the stratosphere of the atmosphere, and this is actually considered good. Why? Because it actually protects the life on earth from the ultraviolet radiation that is actually entering to the earth from the solar radiation or from the sun. Okay, however, if it is present, okay, in the troposphere at a height of around 10 kilometers from that of the ground, it is called as the ground level ozone, or it is also called as a tropospheric ozone, where it actually becomes even more potent when compared to carbon dioxide and can lead to climate change. So this is what this particular point has actually discussed. Next one, let us see the methane emissions according to the International Energy Agency. It says that it's the largest source of anthropogenic methane. So if you see the total amount of emission from their largest source actually comes from the anthropogenic emissions, that is human induced, in terms of what? In terms of agriculture, in terms of the energy sector, specifically in coal, oil, natural gas as well as biofuels. If you can see how much of emission is actually being done from the industries is what you can observe in this particular figure. Next one, if you see India's contribution, that is India's global methane emissions actually stand at 8.3%, very very high. Okay, still. Then let's move forward and see. Let me zoom this for you guys. Okay, so what are the major sources of methane? So the first major source of methane, we will actually classify that into two. One is nothing but it is your natural source, and the next one is what? The next one is your anthropogenic sources. Okay, so if you see the natural source, first one is wetlands. Okay, so if you see wetland ecosystems, that actually includes your mangroves, you can actually have your swamps, etc. These can what have, they can be a largest natural source of methane emission. Okay, so around 30% of the global emissions actually come from these wetlands only. These also includes the rice, paddy, etc. That is why they say agriculture contributes to majority of what, the methane emission. That is why here you have to recall the global methane pledge. Okay, so here what happens, India did not sign it because there were discussion in the COP29 stating that there's too much of emission of methane and there's too much of emission of greenhouse gases. So that is why we have to control it by 30% from the 2020 levels by 2030. This is what they actually discussed, but India did not sign it. Why? Because majority of the Indian economy actually runs on agriculture as well as cattle rearing, and cattle especially release around 29% of methane. How cattle actually releases around 29% of methane is that it is by the process of digestion. Okay, so what happens is when the cattle actually eats, for example, I'm very bad at drawing a cow, but but then imagine this is a cow. Okay, so this is a cow. So when the cow actually eats the, I mean, I don't want to even risk it. Okay, fine. This is cow, and imagine the cow actually intakes the grass as well as, or whatever, the crop or the fodder that it is actually fed with. So when it moves inside the stomach of the cow, what happens? There is actually a bigger portion of the stomach that is called as what? Digestion takes place over here. Then this portion is called as the rumen. And in the stomach, what happens is that there is some process called as what? Enteric fermentation. It is called as what? Enteric fermentation. And once the fermentation actually takes place, what happens is that it releases the methane, it releases carbon dioxide as well as other volatile organic compounds or gases also. Okay, so this is released into the atmosphere, and also after digestion during the excretion process, that is the cow dung, what happens there also? Methane is actually present. So this is how cattle actually, what to say, contribute, or the livestock contribute to the methane emissions. And that is why India did not sign the global methane pledge, because we are a developing economy, right? Now where majority of the population is dependent on agriculture for their livelihoods, if we sign some pledge like this and if we don't abide by it, then what will happen? Or if we have to abide by it, then majority of those population actually have to move towards the urban areas. Okay, where again the skilling is not sufficient, the education is not sufficient, so again everything will actually be affected. Okay, so this is what it is. So first, wetlands, they actually are the biggest source of the methane emissions. Next one, termites. Termites also produce this particular methane as a byproduct of the digestive process. That is 11% of the methane is actually emitted by termites, and this is according to the recent report of United Nations Environment Program, that is UNEP. Next one is oceans and freshwater bodies. How is methane produced here? It is by the marine microorganisms which are actually present over here in the oceans and freshwater. So these microorganisms under anaerobic conditions, that is with less of oxygen, what do? They actually release methane, and here around 2% of the global emissions are actually with respect to that of these oceans and fresh water. Next one, geological sources. If there are any natural eruptions, for example, the volcanic eruptions, or in case of geothermal vents, etc. Yesterday also we saw arsenic contamination primarily happens naturally only. It actually comes out from the aquifers or the vents that are present in the beneath. Okay, so this is what it is. So it comes from the geological sources also, like the natural gas seams, or you can actually have the geothermal vents, the volcanic eruptions, etc. And this contributes to around 4% of the methane emission. Okay, so these are all what? Your natural sources. The next one is anthropogenic sources. Anthropogenic sources is, first one is agriculture. Agriculture, I told you, livestock, of a phenomenon called as enteric fermentation. And also, if you see, according to the Food and Agricultural Organization, this is responsible for around 27% of the methane global emissions. So that is one, livestock. Next one is because of the anaerobic decomposition of the organic matter in the rice fields, and also paddy. These actually produce around 10% of the global emissions. Next one, the production of fossil fuel. So methane is released during the production. When you're processing the fossil fuels or when you're transporting the fossil fuels, methane is actually produced. Okay, so this accounts for around 23%. Now moving on, landfills and waste management. So how this methane is produced in the landfills is that there's lot of litter, there is a lot of organic matter, right? So what happens when there is decomposition of this organic matter, or what do you say, because of precipitation there is some chemical activity or fermentation that actually takes place, then what happens, methane actually comes out. Okay, or during the wastewater treatment over there, methane comes out. The last one is burning of the biomass. You know, right, when the agriculture residue and the other crops are actually burnt, what happens, it gives out other obnoxious or the chemical or very polluting substances like the methane. So this is all, or these are all the major sources of methane. So here you can see how the digestion process actually takes place inside the cow. So you have the enteric fermentation. Here you have the volatile fatty acids, carbon dioxide, as well as the methane that is actually produced, which comes out, and it is also present in the cow dung during the excretion. Okay, so this is what is methane. Now, what are the initiatives that have been taken so far in order to curb the methane pollution? Okay, so far, if there are any doubts, please do, feel free to ask in the comment section. Okay. So, let us see initiatives to tackle. I told you about the global methane pledge, right? At COP26. COP26 when? Where? Glasgow. Okay, so at COP26, a lot of things were actually discussed. Okay, very, very important. And one such is this global methane pledge. Okay, so at COP26, they aimed at reducing the methane emissions by 30% when compared to that of the 2020 levels by 2030. But India is actually not a part of it. And also there is a global methane initiative. Okay, so this is an international public-private partnership. Again, it actually aims to reduce the methane. Next one, methane sat. This is actually, useful in tracking as well as monitoring the status of methane emission globally. And also we discussed about Mars. That is what? Methane alert and response system. So it actually gives you the alert of how much of methane is actually released globally and what are the major sources, whether these are industries that are involved or whether it is due to the other anthropogenic factors, whether it is by agriculture, which part of the globe is actually emitting more, all that this says. Next one, the decarbonization charter, oil and gas decarbonization charter. This also aims to accelerate the reductions of emissions, especially with respect to what industries, the oil as well as gas industry. And then there is another initiative, World Bank's Global Gas Flaring Reduction Partnership. What do you mean by gas flaring? When there is production of these oil as well as gas, that is the fuels, what happens, there is generation of some quantity of gas. Okay, what do? They don't use it for any other purpose. That is why they actually further burn it. Okay, when you further burn it, methane actually comes out. So that has to be reduced, and for that we have the World Bank's gas flaring reduction partnership. Next one, initiatives taken by India. So first it is methane reduction in agriculture. We have few initiatives. Then methane reduction in in livestock. So few initiatives. First one, the national mission on sustainable agriculture. So here they are telling either you have to curb, that is mitigate it, otherwise you have to adapt. Okay, so what are they saying? Bring about the resilient varieties are what you say, the centers that actually act as what, the connecting bridge between the ICAR. What centers are this? Krishi Vigyan Kendras. Okay, so in case of any kind of research that has been taken up by the ICAR, that is Indian Council of Agriculture Research, then they come up with some key outcomes. For example, they are taking up some research on soil, and if they're coming out with a data on soil fertility. What kind of crops are required over here? Does this soil require more of fertilizers or not? Whether what to say, this is actually fertile enough for growing sugarcane or other kind of crops. All that if they come up with, then that information actually have to be passed over to the farmers in order to take up sustainable practices, isn't it? So for that only, the government has actually established this Krishi Vigyan Kendra. So this actually educates the farmers on climate resilient practices. Next one, methane reduction in the livestock sector. That is why we have the National Livestock Mission, where we actually bring about a breed improvement. That is, genetic disposition of the particular livestock itself is different when compared to the normal cattle, where the digestion, that is the enteric fermentation, is actually happening, resulting in the release of methane. So breed improvement have to be there, and there has to be a balanced rationing. Okay, this has to be there. Balanced rationing means what is the amount of food that you give to the cattle is also very important. Okay, because burning that also in excess will lead to methane, and if you're feeding excess also, that will lead to the release of methane. Next one, encourage the production of green fodder and promote the techniques like silage making as well as chaff cutting. Okay, silage making is nothing but this is fermenting the feed. Okay, so when you ferment the feed, what happens? It actually stores the nutrient richness inside itself without releasing much of methane. Or the chaff cutting, that is, if the fodder is of this length, what happens? You cut it into half. Okay, so that also in some way actually reduces the methane emissions, is what studies have actually proved. Okay, so here these are Indian initiatives. Others include waste management and energy production. First one, we have the Gobar Dhan scheme. Okay, that is what you have to do. You have to take the biodegradable waste and you have to convert that into resources without wasting it or openly burning it or by using unsustainable methods in order to release methane. The next one, new national biogas as well as organic manure program. So here this actually incentivizes, it actually gives you incentives when you use the cattle waste. Okay, when you utilize cattle waste and reduce the methane emissions, there is incentives that are given. Next one are the other initiatives like Harit Dara initiative. Okay, so this is an initiative which has been brought about by the ICAR. Here they have actually developed an anti-methanogenic feed. Okay, so a kind of feed that does not result in the emission of methane. Okay, so this is why they actually supplement the normal feed with this Harit Dara, which cuts down the cattle methane emissions by around 17 to 20%, thereby controlling the warming. Next one, implementation of the Bharat Standard 6 emission norms, very important. And the final one is NAPCC. This is nothing but the National Action Plan on Climate Change. Okay, what is this National Action Plan on Climate Change? This is nothing but it actually encompasses 8 initiatives like what? The National Solar Mission, then you have the National Water Mission, then National Mission on Sustainable Agriculture, then Sustainable Habitat is there, Sustainable Himalayan Ecosystem is there, then you have Energy Efficiency is there. Okay, so similarly one of it, that is next one is Green India Mission is there. Okay, so all these 8 missions put together is a National Action Plan on Climate Change which came up in 2008 by the government of India. So that also aims to bring about measures in order to address the methane emissions. Okay, so this is what are the different initiatives. Next, let's move on to our next topic, that is nitrogen pollution. Okay, so what do you mean by nitrogen pollution is what we will discuss over here. Okay, so any doubts if you guys have so far, please do tell me, so that after a 1-minute break, let's quickly start with our topic of nitrogen pollution. Can we start with the next topic, that is nitrogen pollution? Yes, we will start. Okay. Let's actually start with nitrogen pollution. So there was a recent study. The name of the study is not very important. So the recent study actually said that there has been an increase in the global water scarcity crisis. So water is already scarce. Okay, so water is getting scarce, and this is further worsened by declining quality of water, majorly because of what? The nitrogen pollution in the rivers. So one thing you understand, when we actually use fertilizers on the crops, okay, for example, you're using fertilizer on the crops, what happens? This nitrogen actually runs off below, and then it actually, that is, percolates, and then there is leaching, and because of which what happens? The groundwater is getting affected. Or if it actually runs off, the agriculture runoff into the rivers with respect to nitrogen or any other nutrients like phosphorus, what happens? This actually makes this particular river or the lake or the pond what? Nutrient rich. Because of this nutrient richness, there is a process of eutrophication. What is eutrophication? There is excessive growth of excessive algae that actually grows, or the phytoplanktons that actually grow. Okay, so this process is called as what? The algal bloom. When there is algal bloom on the surface, it will be totally covered with algae as well as the small plants, the surface of the river. Because of this, what happens? There is the incident insolation, or the sunlight does not reach over here. So because of that, what happens? There actually the biodiversity or the ecosystem that is existing underneath will actually perish. Okay, so this is what it is. And also, when the algae eventually die, the bacteria, in order to decompose that material, will require more and more oxygen. So when it takes more and more oxygen from here, the biochemical oxygen demand also increases. Thereby the dissolved oxygen decreases, and hence the species actually present here dies. Okay, so this is how nitrogen pollution is going to impact the ecosystem. Now let's actually move forward and see and understand. See, I told you what is eutrophication over here, how it is actually affecting the nutrient richness. This is how it affects the seas and the lakes. So the excessive release of nitrogen compounds into the environment, primarily by human activities, which disrupts the ecosystem not only by contaminating the air and water, but also contributes to the greenhouse gases like the nitrous oxide, etc. This poses risks to the humans and wildlife. Okay, so it affects the environment as well as the public health. So this is what is nitrogen pollution. Now let us understand what are the major sources of nitrogen pollution. It's very easy, right? First of all, I told you agriculture, runoff that pollutes the water bodies. Okay, if you see, India is the world's largest consumer of synthetic nitrogen fertilizers, and this was one of the why this was actually became why India became the largest consumer is that a large amount of subsidies was given to agriculture by the government. Okay, so the subsidies was on water, the subsidy, sometimes free electricity was given. Okay, free water was given. That is why for irrigation purposes there was enormous utilization of water. So water scarcity was there, especially during the green revolution. Okay, so this is why India became the world's largest consumer of synthetic nitrogen fertilizers. And then there was excessive fertilizer used during the green revolution 1960s 70s, and there was inefficient application of these fertilizers, so that leached eventually into the groundwater, and thereby it ran to the nearby streams, rivers, ponds, lakes, etc., polluting it. Okay, next, the livestock farming. So if you see, India also depends a lot on this particular cattle. Okay, so its large number of cattle is housed by India, and then we have improper management of the waste that is given out by the cattle. So this actually becomes the source of ammonia as well as nitrogen compounds, and this also significantly contributes to nitrogen pollution. The second one, wastewater as well as the sewage treatment plants. If these sewage treatment plants are improperly or inefficiently treated or managed, what happens? They give out very, very dangerous nitrogen compounds. Okay, so this actually includes ammonia or nitrate, again causing nitrogen pollution. The next one, the atmospheric deposition. That is when when there is fossil fuel combustion, there is release of nitrous oxide. Okay, and this actually happens by the vehicular emissions also. It can happen because of your power plants or any kind of other industrial processes. Okay, next one, they get deposited back on the earth's surface. How? The nitrous oxide goes by evaporation. It actually condenses here and gets back as the acid rain. Okay, and here what happens, it either deposits as as precipitation, because in the form of acid rain, or the dry deposition as particulates. Okay, so they actually make their way eventually into the water bodies. Apart from agriculture runoff, apart from industries, the wastewater mistreatment or inefficient treatment, there are also other reasons. One such is your urban runoff. Okay, so the storm runoff, or because of a storm, if you actually have a torrential downpour, what happens? There will be runoff. This carries the nitrogen pollutants. Okay, it can also be from other sources like either the pet waste, the fertilizers from lawns, gardens, etc. So that also makes their way into the sewage systems. Okay, next one is industrial discharges. We know because of a number of processes like chemical manufacturing in the industries, pharmaceutical industries, the food processing industries, all these actually, when they do not treat their wastewater properly, what happens? It actually releases lot of nitrogen into the water. That is the streams or the rivers. The next one is aquaculture. Okay, so whatever feed that we actually give for these fish, etc., they also release the nitrogen, and this also results in the accumulation of nitrogen or a release of nitrogen. Okay, so these are all the sources. For example, nitrogen from the land, if it moves into the streams, there is increase. Okay, let me actually zoom this guy, zoom it for you guys. So if you see here, okay, so when the nitrogen from the land enters into the stream, there is excessive growth of what? The phytoplanktons. Okay, then what happens when it actually, moves, it eventually percolates into the groundwater. Okay, and when there is more phytoplankton, what happens? It actually results in algal bloom, and there is a rapid growth of algal bloom where the sunlight actually is very, very scarce or faint, which is percolating over here. Because of what? Because of this, the grasses and the vegetation over here actually dies. There is loss of habitat for these animals, and when the sunlight doesn't go enough, or photosynthesis actually does not take place, so there will be anaerobic condition where the oxygen is very, very less. The dissolved oxygen becomes very, very less. So because of which the fish as well as the other ecosystem that actually thrive here dependent on them actually die. Okay, so this is the source of nitrogen pollution, and this is how nitrogen pollution actually affects the ecosystem at large. Now, let us see what are the impacts very, very quickly. See, all these PPTs with which I'm actually taking the classes will be provided to you on our website. Okay, so please be aware of it, or in case if you don't know where to download these PPTs from, please do mention that in the comment section so that our team will get back in touch with you and they will help you with the required materials that you need. Okay, so first thing is eutrophication. We saw the algae overgrowth and what is going to happen. The next one, we saw the aquatic ecosystem disruption, because the food web as well as the food chain, everything will be affected. Okay, so here just a passing reference. What do you mean by food chain? One of you had actually asked in the previous classes. Food chain is nothing but it is food chain is a linear sequence, okay, of passage of energy as well as nutrients. Okay, for example, if there is grass, okay, so grass is eaten by a rabbit and rabbit is eaten by a wolf. Okay, so this is a single pathway or a single direction of food, a single sequence where the energy and the nutrients actually flow. Okay, so this is called as the food chain, where food web is a number of food chains which are actually interconnected. For example, the rabbit can be eaten by a wolf also, and it can be eaten by a hawk also, and a hawk can eat a snake also. Again, the snake can eat the rabbit also. So all these things, this is interconnection. This is called as the food web. Okay, so this is what it is. Now the next risk that it actually causes is the human health risk. Okay, so it actually causes methemoglobinemia and also causes what? The blue baby syndrome in adults, in infants, blue baby syndrome in infants. Then apart from that, it also causes the economic impact, okay, because it is actually going to impact further the fisheries and the aquaculture. So people who are dependent for their livelihood on this are going to be affected. Next one is soil degradation. Okay, definitely yes, soil is going to be acidified with more and more application of the nitrogen fertilizers or synthetic fertilizers. So this is going to threaten the food security at a large scale. Next one is air pollution. I told you when there is actually the evaporation that actually takes place, there's a lot of nitrous oxide, or when there is combustion of the fossil fuels, nitrous oxide through the vehicular emissions, nitrous oxide gets into the atmosphere. So the greenhouse gas emission will be there. Next one, biodiversity loss. We also saw, right, this is going to bring in a lot of invasive alien species that can thrive in the nitrogen rich soils, thereby the native ecosystem or the biodiversity is going to be under threat. So these are the impacts of nitrogen pollution. Okay, so here we are done with impacts. Now we'll quickly move on to the next topic, that is mercury pollution. Okay, so very surprisingly, the researchers from MIT have actually said that there has been a 10% drop in the atmospheric mercury levels between 2005 and 2020. However, this is contradicting to many of the events that are actually taking place and many of the reports that other organizations are actually coming up with. So that doesn't matter, but we now have to understand what do you mean by mercury and what are the impacts of this mercury pollution, and because of which what is the global convention, that is the Minamata Convention, when was it actually brought about and did India ratify that or not, is what we will look over here. Okay, so let's quickly move into and understand what is mercury. Mercury, the name actually stands, it is represented as Hg, right? So what do you mean by Hg? It is hydra gyrum. Hydra gyrum. Do you understand? So gyrum actually means silver and hydra means water. Okay, so the mercury is nothing but it is a naturally occurring heavy metal, or it is a potent pollutant. Okay, so which actually causes significant risks to human health as well as environment. In the physical state, it is actually, if you see the physical property of that, it is the only liquid metal at the room temperature, and there are different forms, that is elemental form, it is Hg, and it is in inorganic form, that is the mercury chloride, and then you have organic form, that is nothing but methyl mercury. This is specifically when mercury actually there is runoff into the rivers or the lake or in that ecosystem, this actually goes as in the inorganic form, that is methyl mercury. Okay, so this eventually bioaccumulates inside the organism. So you would have heard about these terms bioaccumulation and biomagnification. Let us see what it is. That is, if there is a fish species that is actually living over here, what happens if it is consuming a, God, I'm just poor at diagram. Okay, fine. So right now it looks like that. Okay, fine. Let's consider that this is fish. Okay. So a fish is actually intaking or consuming a lot of methyl mercury. So there is going to be a prolonged exposure or a long period of exposure of this fish to the mercury intake. Okay. So this actually results in bioaccumulation. So bioaccumulation is nothing but the prolonged intake or the accumulation of a pollutant or a chemical substance in a particular species is called bioaccumulation. And in contrast, we have another term called as biomagnification. What do you mean by biomagnification? This actually increases when you go upward, upside the trophic levels. Okay, that is, for example, if there is a particular amount of nitrogen that is present in the plant, that is actually taken in by rabbit, and already now rabbit actually has bioaccumulated this particular nitrogen. Now this, along with what you say, this particular nitrogen level is consumed by who? The wolf. So let's say wolf already will be had bioaccumulated nitrogen from some other source. now it is going to add. Okay, so this is actually increasing when you move up the trophic levels, and that is actually called as biomagnification. Okay, so bioaccumulation, this converts to methyl mercury in the aquatic systems, and it accumulates in the fish and the shellfish, and thereby when we consume it, what happened, it's going to become biomagnified, that is humans are going to die. So this is why recently we had a news also, no, the fish that were actually found in one of the states were very rich in, I mean, they found that excessive concentration of mercury was found. Okay, so I think Tamil Nadu was it. Okay, so here you can actually see volcanic eruptions, mines, and it enters into the marine ecosystem, becomes methyl mercury, then mixes in the food chain, then we have the smaller animals which are actually consuming it, and then finally there is death. Okay, so this is what is about mercury pollution. If you see what are the sources of mercury pollution, so always any kind of pollutant that is actually present, or any kind of the organic or the inorganic substances that are present, it always comes from the natural sources also. Okay, for example, if you have the volcanic eruptions, or if you have the weathering of the rocks, or any kind of geothermal activities, the mercury will automatically be released into the atmosphere, or it will mix with water, or it will actually mix with the soil. Okay, example, mercury rich bedrocks are there, that is actually being weathered by glaciers. Example, if you see Greenland ice sheet is very rich in mercury. Okay, so this is what it is. So this is what it is, that is the landfills and the industrial pollution. These are all anthropogenic, whereas you have volcanic eruptions as well as what, the bedrocks, which naturally actually has mercury. Do you understand? Now, we will move forward. The anthropogenic sources, of course, the gold mining. There is a process called as the ASGM. This is nothing but the artisanal and small scale gold mining. Okay, so this actually uses mercury in order to extract gold. So this releases the mercury into rivers as well as forests, which contributes to around 37% of global mercury emissions. Next, the coal-based thermal power plants, obviously when you burn coal and the other fossil fuels, it releases the mercury into atmosphere, that is around 25%. The next one, other industrial processes, that is when you're during your cement production, and then you have other metal productions, etc. This is going to cause the release of what? Mercury. Next one, waste disposal. That is, if you do not dispose the water, that is, or the treated water, or without treating also, if you don't dispose that properly, which is high in mercury, that is going to cause the what? Pollution. Okay, so this is also present in many of the waste substances, like you have the fluorescent lamps as well as the other batteries. Okay, so these are the sources of pollution. So you have landfills and industrial pollution. This results in biomagnification. There is also contaminated soil, because you burn the biomass, it actually goes into the atmosphere also. So this actually becomes a cycle. Okay, so this is what is mentioned in this particular picture. Now let us move forward and see what are the different sources of mercury pollution. Okay, we saw first one, sorry, not sources, this is the impact. Okay, so health impact of mercury. Okay, both the environment as well as the impact on health. So first one, the health effects, if you see, it is very toxic to, if you're not able to see this properly, let me zoom it. So this is very toxic to your nervous system, to your immune system, to your digestive system. So overall body, that is the functioning of the lungs, kidneys and other vital organs actually are affected. The next one, the health impacts. Okay, the health impacts, that is the methyl mercury exposure via fish consumption also causes a lot of neurological disorders. Then moving forward, the Minamata disease. Okay, so in the 1950s, this is something that you have all of us heard about, right? So in 1950s, there was this disease in Japan. Okay, so this is actually due to the methyl mercury poisoning, which has actually come from the industrial waste, and this caused a lot of sensory loss, the tremors, the impairment of vision, etc. So that is why we actually named that convention on mercury curbing as the Minamata Convention. Okay, India has ratified this convention. We will actually see that. Environmental impact, it persists in the ecosystem. So bioaccumulation, biomagnification, and also it is affecting the food chain and the food web. Next, high concentration in the Arctic as well as the glacial melt waters. Okay. Now, let us actually move forward and see the Minamata Convention on Mercury. It is a legally binding treaty, the global treaty adopted in 2019, and it entered into force 4 years later. Okay, so in 2017. So what is the main objective? Obviously, to reduce the mercury emissions which are actually used or from the industries as well as the mining processes. Next one, regulate the trade, and whether you're going to store it or whether you're going to dispose it, that has to be regulated. Next one, address the contaminated sites and the health impacts. Okay. Next one, India's role, they ratified the convention just 1 year later, that is in 2017 it came into force, and 2018 we signed it. And the key events that actually took place with respect to the mercury emission or release was the Bali Declaration, COP24 2022. This called for the combating illegal mercury trade. Very, very important. So about mercury we have two, okay, MB. That is, one is the Minamata Convention 2017. Then we have the Bali Declaration 2022 in COP4. Okay, so this also called for combating illegal mercury trade. Okay, do you understand? So now with this I think we have actually finished the Minamata Convention also. So next one is persistent organic pollutants. Let's have a hang of the time. So it is we actually have 15 to 20 more minutes. Okay, so we will see this. If time permits, we will start with waste management. If not, we will actually wrap the session up today and we will start with waste management tomorrow. So along with waste management, we will be dealing with other important topics of geography also. I will tell you towards the end of it. So persistent organic pollution. So there has been a UN global study that said that the persistent organic pollutants which are actually present, this have reduced significantly, okay, from the ecosystem because of the regulatory measures that have taken. But there has been an increase in the emergence of the PFAS. Okay, so what do you mean by PFAS? PFAS are nothing but the polyfluoroalkyl substances. Polyfluoroalkyl substances. So this is called as the PFAS. Okay, so this is what it is. Let us actually see this PFAS. These are nothing but these organic or the inorganic compounds or the chemicals. They are actually used in a number of products. Okay, either it can be your cosmetics, or if you see the non-stick pan on which you make dosa and all, no, you have a coating that is called as the Teflon coating. That is also an example of PFAS, and these are called as forever chemicals. Okay, why these are called forever chemicals? Because they actually never break down. Okay, whether they are in the environment or whether they have actually gone into us, they stay there for a long time without getting broken down. Okay, so that is why it leads to further problems like failure of lungs, failure of kidneys. There will also be cancers because of this. Okay, so there has been an increased concern that PFAS are increasingly present in the ecosystem. Do you understand? Now, let's move forward and see what are persistent organic pollutants. These are very toxic organic chemicals, okay, that are carbon based, which persist in the environment. They bioaccumulate in the organisms, thereby resulting in the health deterioration. Okay, so this includes pesticides like the DDT. What is DDT? This is dichloro diphenyl trichloroethane. Okay, so this is called as DDT, and then it is also found in the industrial chemicals like the PCBs. Okay, so this is nothing but polychlorinated, not important but still, polychlorinated biphenyls. Okay, so these are excessively found. The persistent organic pollutants are excessively found in the pesticides as well as industrial chemicals. We always see this DDT. Then the subsidies given for DDT fertilizers, is it going to be environmentally viable or not, is what the authors usually write in the Hindu and the Indian Express. Okay, so in order to regulate this only, we actually had the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants, which came into force in 2004. Okay, so it's a global treaty which actually tries to eliminate or restricts this POPs, and 85 countries have actually ratified it. Did India ratify? Yes, it ratified in 2006, 2 years after it came into force. So this actually lists 34 POPs. Okay, so this is actually listed as 17 pesticides. So 34 POPs are there, where 17 pesticides, 15 industrial chemicals, 7 unintentional byproducts, all these things are there. Here the health and environmental impact is what? Cancer, the disruption in the endocrine system, fertility issues, the damage in the liver, thyroid, etc. are some of the impacts that it actually causes. Okay, now let's move forward and see what happens. So pesticide application is there, goes to the ground. Okay, absorbed by the soil. And then what does it do? It actually accumulates and bioavailability is there. Then it is actually taken up by the plant, where thereby there is falling leaves, there is decreasing yield and less productivity. Okay, so this is one cycle. Otherwise, when it is actually volatile, it actually what? Evaporates and pours down as acid rain. Okay, so because of evaporation. Next, what happens? There is further leaching, or it goes underground and causes contamination of the flowing groundwater, or it is actually causes the biodegradation, where it alters the chemical and the physical property of the soil. Okay, so this is what is the POP. So sources are what? Solid waste and landfill transport, and then you see production as well as processing industries. Again, the vehicle exhaust and all. Then agricultural practices like pesticide spraying, etc. we saw. Natural processes also involve what? Volcanic eruptions, etc. Okay, so these are the POPs, these are the sources, and this is going to be the impact on the biodiversity. Finally, what are PFAS? I already told you, these are hazardous as well as synthetic chemicals which have toxic effects on both the environment and human health, called as the forever chemicals, because they actually are present for a long term, whether in the ecosystem or in the human body. They actually spread through the soil, water and air during the production, and it causes widespread pollution. So whether this PFAS is listed in Stockholm Convention or not, yes it is. India ratified it or not? Yes, in 2006. So where are the application of PFAS? They are used in cosmetics, they are used in non-stick cookware, aircraft, wind turbines and industrial applications are there because of their high resistance. Okay, they are resistant to high heat, they are resistant to stains, they are resistant to oil also. That's why they say no non-stick. So this is what it is. The health impact, again we actually discussed risk of cancer, and then different endocrine issues are there, hormonal imbalance, disruptions, less fertility, etc. So these are all the products which actually contain PFAS. Your cosmetics actually contain. That's why they say don't use too much of lipsticks and other things. So this is what it is. Next is actually the stain resistant products, the paint, water resistant clothing, the microwave, popcorn bags also contain. Okay, then the firefighting foams, then personal care products are there, non-stick cookware. All these are the products that actually abound in PFAS. Okay, so with this we've actually completed the topic of pollution. Okay, so we have completed the topic of pollution. So after this we actually have a small topic, that is waste management. Okay, under waste management there are different types of waste that are generated, all of you know, right? So it is nothing but you have the plastic waste. So first will be your plastic waste. The next is what? Your e-waste, that is your electronic waste. And next one, we actually have a global framework. This is the topic we'll talk on chemicals. Okay, so global framework on chemicals. So with respect to the plastic waste, we have the plastic waste management rules, and we also have the e-waste management rules. So here the provisions and certain concepts like the producer pay or extended producer responsibility, and what is going to be the regulation or the provisions under these particular rules, whether they were amended, what do the new rules of 2024, especially the e-waste management rules of 2024 say, all that we will actually be discussing. So since we started little late, I think we actually cannot extend it little more further, because we will discuss and start this waste management from tomorrow. Okay, so we will actually have our DNA session now by 4 o'clock. So we will actually start with this particular waste management topic tomorrow. So I hope you actually enjoyed this session. So I'm concluding the session here. So we will start with waste management, and we will also have discussions on the geography topics that were in news. Okay, so we will start with the new minerals that were actually found by the researchers recently in the mantle portion that was called as the ringwoodite, and then we'll discuss on geomagnetic storms. We'll talk about the differential rotation of the sun. We'll talk about nor'westers and triple dip La Nina, etc. So these are all very important topics that have come appeared in the news for the past 1.5 years from the geography section. After that, we actually have only two major sections. One is on the key terms. There are terms like Humboldt enigma, the carbon farming, carbon colonialism. So what do you mean by that? There will be around 10 to 15 terms. For that we can actually dedicate around 1 hour, and post which we will have the species in news discussion, that is around 35 to 40 species are there. So since this is around this is the seventh session, right? So we have three more sessions where we will actually effectively utilize our time and extend our what to say maximum. This one we'll give our maximum in order to complete all these topics. So with these 10 sessions, we will be completing the prelims masterclass on the top most important or the 100 most important current affair topics from environment and ecology. So thank you so much for watching. I will meet you all tomorrow in another live session dealing with more important as well as interesting topics. And if you like this lecture, please do like, share and subscribe to Narayana IAS Academy YouTube channel. Thank you.